Hi, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Maxon for inviting me to present today. My name is Ethan Shaftel, and I'm a director working primarily in VR. And I've done a variety of different projects over the last several years, from game engine, games and interactive experiences in VR, to live action 360 video, to pre-rendered animation and 360 video. And the common link between all these very different types of projects and different types of workflows for me has been C4D. So I use Cinema 4D at all stages of production, from pre-production into production and development to post-production assets. And though I use it differently for different types of projects, I find it a really useful tool in pretty much all spatial projects where space and immersion is a component. So I'm going to open up some files for you, walk through a couple of projects and how I use the tool, and maybe give you a little bit of background information on VR and the state of it right now. So my most recent project is an interactive VR comedy entitled Ajax All-Powerful, and it stars Henry Winkler, who is, of course, from Happy Days, but also Barry more recently, and Arrested Development, and Chris Parnell, who is from Saturday Night Live and 30 Rock and lots of things, including Rick and Morty, where he's very funny. So this year, Ajax was in competition and a selection of the Tribeca Film Festival, the Annecy Animation Festival, and our premiere was actually in September at the Venice Film Festival. And it's not publicly available yet. We're still in festivals, but that will be soon. And in Ajax, we use C4D for everything in all stages, from previs early in the writing and planning, to VR storyboards that helped us find financing, to all of our final animation work that we exported into a game engine for the interactivity.
Hi, I'm Ajax. I used to be addicted to the sweet yet savory tang of fresh human souls.
Have you rubbed the lamp yet? Is there a genie inside?
Mr. Genie!
Who wants to make some wishes? Who the hell are you?
We took the liberty of preparing a more robust agreement.
Okay.
What?
It's never enough!
Whoopsie daisy.
Oh, God, is he?
Good grief. Let's get this show on the road.
Problem with the language?
Me? No, this is just my resting bitch face. Don't mind me.
So I'm going to walk you through Ajax a little bit later in the presentation, but for now I'd like to give you a little background on me. I have a traditional cinema background for a long time. I've directed many narrative projects, plus I was an editor for a very long time. But I also have pretty rich experience in interactivity over the years. I worked at a game company, and then have, on the narrative side, have done a variety of interactive narrative experiences, pre-VR, that you play on a desktop computer or a mobile device. But then I also have, for a good component of my career, worked in immersive media in live spaces. So that includes, working with media for big screens in big pop concerts and tours, to installation pieces for brands, almost sculptural, where media plays a component, to even theme park and parade type projects, parade floats that have animation and media. And so in all these, that I'm calling immersive here, the way you think about the audience, the way you think about their point of view is fundamentally different than in cinema, because they're really inside of the world. They're inside of the media in a fundamental way. These are some older projects, but I'll go ahead and play my reel here. So there's only a little bit of my early VR projects cut into that montage. That's mostly old, but I wanted to just make the point that, when VR caught my interest about 4 years ago, it really was because it combined these three elements. There's this promise of interactivity and the ability for rich interaction, all the way down to very light interaction, but it's always there since you really are inside the world. There's the immersion, which of course is, the first thing you realize when you put on the headset is that you've been transported, but also the potential for cinematic storytelling and the overlap with the types of techniques, music, performance, sound, animation, being combined into story. And so it just seemed like a great thing for me to start working. So I'm going to walk you through 3 VR projects where C4D was integral to the workflow in some way, but in each case, pretty differently. And the bottom line is, if you're working in VR, you need to be thinking about, and you are thinking about, space, and having a way of playing in space from the very first concepting, and a tool to be playing in space is very important. So first, some quick VR basics before we move on. If you have a headset on and you are watching or interacting with a VR experience, you're likely looking at one of 2 broad categories here. The first is game engine. So a game engine is being rendered in real time for you. The 3 dimensions around you are simulated in simulated space, and your movements are controlling, an avatar in that space. That you likely have the freedom of movement to go forward and back, left and right, up and down. We call that 6DOF, 6DOF, so 6DOF project. The workflow for a project like that, regardless of if it's a game or if it's a narrative, is really a game workflow. You may use a tool like C4D for modeling and asset creation or animation, but then you're exporting those into a game engine environment for the authoring, for the interactivity, and that's likely Unity or Unreal if you're working in VR. And then what the viewer, what the user is actually watching or experiencing is an app. It's an executable file. That's the workflow. But there's another option here. You could be watching, the viewer with the headset could be watching a 360 video. That's a very different type of experience in terms of workflow. It's likely a filmic workflow. You've either filmed some 360 video content with an actual camera, or you've been in an animation environment like C4D or Maya and filmed with a virtual 360 camera and rendered out individual frames, just like any video file. You've used something like Premiere to edit those clips together. You've put music and sound effects on it, and you've rendered out a .mp4. And so what the user is actually watching is a linear video file. It's a series of frames. If it's 3D, the 3D could be very believable, but it's an illusion. It's the left and right eye are delivered separately, just like any 3D movie. And it's not a simulation of space in the way that the game engine is. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the pre-rendered 360 video that I do. So case study number 1, previs. So this is the foundation of really all the creative work I do in VR. It's, the more novel a medium, the more a prototype or a pre-visualization is valuable to a creator in order to sell their idea, to convince people to get on board, to just explain what you're thinking. So different types of projects need different types of previs in order to do that. I create VR storyboards. I sometimes call it a prototype if I'm talking more to software or game people. But my favorite term for this is a VR animatic. So if you work in animation or commercials or a lot of fields, you may have come across that term. It may be something you're familiar with. This is just a example I found online, but I like it because it's just nicely done. The point of an animatic is that the visual side of it's as rough as possible. You do the bare minimum on the visuals. What you're trying to do here is introduce time. Film is a temporal medium. What an animatic does that storyboards don't is it introduces pacing and performance and dramatics. You really start making the movie when you start making a animatic. This is where filmmaking comes in. So I wanted to have this type of tool in VR, a tool where I didn't get stuck on visuals yet. The space and timing was apparent. And I got an opportunity with a project called Kaiju Confidential. So Kaiju is a pre-rendered VR comedy that premiered at Sundance last year, in 2019. It stars Paul F. Tompkins, who was Mr. Peanut Butter and BoJack Horseman, and Blake Anderson, who is in Workaholics and a lot of other funny stuff, as the two kaiju here. And it's really a short comedy about, neurotic monsters having a turf battle. And the writer described it early on as Curb Your Enthusiasm with kaiju. So I had a meeting with producers. They shared the script with me and, kicked around ideas. And what became, what was obvious here is that it was funny and it was about these big monsters and there was an opportunity for playing with scale in VR. And so, looking at these scenes, there's these two kaiju, Grigon and Mega Hydra, eating helicopters and rampaging through a city. So, of course, first step for me, open up C4D, make a camera, and then go to the spherical tab of the camera and enable. You'll see the icon change, and now you're, working in VR. So I'm gonna zero this out. So the key with a animatic is, of course, just do not worry about visual quality. That is not the point of this time. You want to quickly get something spatial so you can start adding time elements to it. And everything else is secondary. So, let's make a couple skyscrapers around, maybe a cylindrical one. And then nestle our camera in the middle of these, sort of looming over us. And so let's talk a little bit about about scale. So the size of the perceived size of the viewer inside a VR environment is directly related to the eye separation, how far their eyes are apart. So the default, if we go to the camera, jump to stereoscopic, right now it's set to mono, so scale doesn't apply in a mono render, but you should be working in stereo, and go to the parallel setting. You'll see some fields open up. So it's the default eye separation is 6.5 centimeters. That's a good default size for a human head. And you can imagine if the space between your eyes is bigger, your whole head is bigger. So your size inside the 3D environment is bigger. So let's leave it like that for a second and make ourselves a figure. And you'll see basically that the human scale of the figure matches the eye separation of the spherical camera at its default scale. But instead of that, let's make our figure much bigger. Let's make this a kaiju. So that roughly means that this camera, if you think of this as being a human head, could maybe fit in this guy's hand. So let me make it a little bit bigger, make him bigger. And that means I want to make my skyscrapers bigger. This camera is very small. So what if I want to shoot at monster scale? Well, I can do a couple things. With my 3D camera, I realized that it's really helpful to have an additional camera, and you can in fact just duplicate this one down, nest it underneath it. But the secondary camera, let's call it viewfinder, or sometimes they call it look around, and let's make it not spherical at all. So now we have a little camera in there that we can jump into and rotate around from our 360 point of view and kind of see what we're talking about. It's also helpful if you make this viewfinder a little bit wide angle so that you kind of get a sense. So now we have our viewfinder camera and our spherical camera where we're going to do our render. You know what? Let's just jump into my kaiju previs here. So this is a monster scale scene. All right, so this is basically what I arrived at. You can see the art is super rough, and I have some different point of views for different shots that I can kind of jump between. Okay, Grigon's seen somebody. and then we zip over here. So I can kind of get movement emulated in here, but what I really want is to just have an environment where I can see how things look and start working out blocking and composition. And at this point, I'm not focused on animation. I'm not focused on time at all. In fact, I use this project, and there's more ways you can organize this, but I use this project mostly as a tool for rendering out still frames, like a true animatic. You know, I think about this as drawing the storyboards without introducing anything else, and then creating the animatic itself in a timeline environment. So before I jump over there, I'll show you some other scenes here. You know, it's kind of a tricky thing to get right on the page, but you can work in a spatial environment and say, okay, we're down on the street. I want to be able to see Mega Hydra over there. He's just hit Greg on the ground. Not worried about how his body's laying or anything. I'm just trying to get his head in the right spot. Let's see, another scene. Scene 1 in the movie, your human scale, and Grygon outside is huge, out the window. So now, you know, you make some renders and you jump right into Premiere to start assembling the animatic. Premiere is great for VR, for 360 content. You can enable VR directly in the preview. It's also a setting you need to have on your sequence to make that enabled. But once you have a sequence identified as VR and what flavor, what you were looking at right here is the stereoscopic left eye over right eye 360 video render straight from C4D. So I enable it here, and now I can use my mouse to look around to emulate the viewer. And using the renders and stills that I made, I add some temp voiceover and really create a true animatic. And this was, the document, a rough version of this, but still had the same, looked a lot like this, but it wasn't as elaborate in terms of the editing, was what I showed to the producers right away as to pitch my take on how we should do the story. It got me the job. And then this sequence got richer and richer as we tried things out and made discoveries about what we wanted to do. And this was really the blueprint for all of the production. Ultimately, the animation for Kaiju Confidential was done in Maya because of the existing team and rendered in Redshift. And so this shows you a little bit of how well the original spatial ideas translated into the finished project. Even though the animation was in a different software, this C4D animatics, it really was the blueprint and the backbone of the production plan, and how we got the project started. Little bonus case study here. As I said, the main animation was in Maya, but I made the Kaiju Confidential title sequence in C4D. And I'll open up that project. So the titles for Kaiju, it's a fairly standard concept here. It flies forward from Z-space and then past us, and we fly through the little gap there between the I and the J of Kaiju in order to enter the next scene. And I was going to use this as a transition element where all this area visible around the title is scene 1, and then through the little hole as we jump through the tunnel we see scene 2. And this has a different kind of impact in VR than it does in traditional cinema, because it really feels like you are entering a new space. So it's a very spatial transition, even though if you've seen something similar in cinema. So we can look here at what's going on. One thing that is kind of funny is that I added a literal green screen here because I needed alpha channel here to be the visibility for the scene 1, and then through here scene 2. So I made a little green plane and then used it as an editorial transition with that isolated, that rendered alone, to go into the second scene on that side. There's probably other ways to do it, but I did a literal green screen for how I used it. This shows you the title sequence in the flames, and then we pass right through into scene 2. So this brings up an interesting point. we end up with this movie. We have this great 360 movie. You can watch it on the headset. You can watch it in a 360 viewer. But sometimes you need to have sort of a traditional clip to edit into your reel, or the festival wants a clip. So that brings me to the next case study, which is publicity clips. Let me show you some good ways to do that. In cinema, let's make a new project. So a 360 video viewer is just a camera floating in the middle of the spherical video content. And so the player itself is has that camera in the middle of a sphere, and that's the equirectangular video content is formatted for that sphere. So you can mock one up yourself for the purposes of converting your 360 video into something that you can edit into your reel. Basically, the camera becomes the viewer's head, and you animate it around your content, almost a chance to direct it again. So if I open up, So this is a project I made to make a clip of kaiju for publicity purposes. You can see I have a camera floating in the middle of this sphere, and the spherical, let me just improve the quality there. The spherical content is warped around the camera on this sphere. And if I jump into a couple different cameras in here, looking around in the sphere, and this emulates the head movement of the viewer. It's really a chance to kind of direct the movie again, though you're limited to the placement in space. Think about any given point, the choices that you might want to make about where you look, or where the viewer looks, and where their attention is directed. So animate your camera with keyframes to look at different spots, and I can show you the results here. Add a little camera motion, camera handshake, and what you end up with is something like this.
What the hell?
Excuse me? Excuse me? Hey! Excuse me! Huh? I said...
Hey!
Mega Hydra! Hey!
Do I know you?
Yeah? I'm Grygon!
Huh.
Grygon! Remember?
The point here is that this is not a technical output process. It's not converting your 360 video into a new format. It's a reimagining of the scene to fit a new format, and it's an artistic process. There are many ways the camera could move in this sequence to kind of heighten the confusion and intensity of all the helicopters surrounding Mega Hydra, but we lose track of Grygon in the distance, for instance, with these choices. That's only one possible approach. It's what I chose for this use. And it's important to note that because, I've had producers ask, can you convert this to a regular, not every 360 scene is going to lend itself to doing something like this. And it works well here, but it really is something that's a reimagining and directing it again, though you're fixed in point of space. And another little bonus here is I told you I end up using C4D for every project, even if it doesn't really seem like it would lend itself to it. I was involved, I was the second unit director for a Walking Dead 360 experience, and also handling the post that was live action. And we needed to make clips from our 360, and the C4D was the way to do it. So let me show you the project where I did this. I'm going to pop out. You'll see our textures are on the sphere. And it's low res here, but I'm going to leave it so that we can kind of get a sense of without it taking too long to chunk through. You know, looking around and following the action in a way, you know, suited to this type of clip. In this project, you know, there's more than one clip and more than one camera movement. This also is a chance to try out different formats. We did one of these cameras in here is a portrait oriented camera. And I can show you the results here. You know, just making choices in C4D for your camera, you end up with different results. So all the movement here is secondary, applied to the camera watching our 360 content. And I added some handheld camera shake. Made a lot of sense here. Let's look at some other clips. Panning around to follow the action. This is, in some ways, this is how you're hoping someone might view your 360 footage. So everything we've talked about thus far has been a very filmic workflow, using C4D to render frames of video and ending up with a video file in VR. But as I explained, that's only one small subsection of VR, and most of what you're seeing if you're in a VR experience is going to be real-time rendered in a game engine, likely Unity or Unreal. Everything I'm going to show you now would apply equally to a workflow with either of those game engines, because what I'm going to talk about is C4D and some different ways you can use it for a project that's ultimately a real-time rendered 6DoF project. So I made a Street Fighter 2 VR experience for Red Bull based on the bonus stage where you beat up a car. It was a activation at Red Bull events where we wanted to recreate the sort of classic bonus stage in VR and let people play it and keep score across multiple days, have a high score, so it can be kind of a meta contest going on simultaneously with big Capcom Red Bull events. So let me show you the. So you get the idea what's going on there. It's a fun, active thing to do in a group in a live event space. So we use C4D for a very specific asset creation and organization tool as the task, rather, at this. So let me open this up. So this is our artist's project that created all the damage states of the car. Now ignore the textures here entirely. The textures are going to be replaced in the game engine. The lighting is going to be done in the game engine. So this Cinema 4D project is really just to create and organize the damage states of the car with no sense of time or keyframes or animation involved. It's sort of pure objects. So if I go to any of the panels on the car that you're going to have the ability to interact with in the game. Let's look here. For instance, the driver wheel well. So there's a state of 0 damage all the way to the state of 3 damage and everything in between. So the idea being that these are all assets that are going to be separate in the game engine, and you'll be cycling through based on how the player interacts with it. Now we had both hand trackers and foot trackers, so every one of these panels could be kicked or hit. It's a little bit confusing in here to turn off and on the right one. So the hood pops up with your first hit, then it starts to crumple, and then eventually it's going to disappear on your journey to being a completely destroyed car. Let's look at the door. We have a lot of states of damage there because the doors make up quite a bit. So we get just some broken glass. Again, the textures themselves are going to be changed. So you're looking at alpha there on the black portion of that window. It'll be transparent. Let me go up here. Oops, this is still on. So we're using C4D to keep track of these and ultimately deliver FBXs that have all these layers in there for, or not layers, but objects for the game to programmatically cycle through. And I can jump to the full destroyed state. Here you can get a sense of what it ends up looking like you saw in the clip. Now, of course, the player never sees the car like this all together where every panel is destroyed, because as you hit and kick them, they disappear and then the round is over when the interior part falls to the ground. So this is it's the classic game workflow using 3D software to create and track assets for delivery to the game engine. And this is, for this particular project, this is all we did in C4D. And the car was the most complex part of this project, but you can see this is a split screen to show another asset here. A lot of what we were using was actual sprites and actual assets from the Street Fighter II game, and then putting them in 3D for the purposes of the game. This one is one of my favorites because it's actually from a different round. If you're familiar with the game, this is a background for one of the fighting rounds. It's not in the bonus stage, but because it's the same setting, it's this pier on this sunny day, we were able to put that boat over to the side as an Easter egg. You look around in space, it's VR, so we could imagine and create everything else that was outside of the point of view of the original game, which was limited to just looking in front of you. So this is just another example of C4D in a workflow of something very different than a 360 video or an animation project. We've circled back around to Ajax All-Powerful. And this is really a project where we use C4D in all of the stages, doing a lot of what I've shown you for other projects. So before it looked anything like this, it looked like this. This is one of the first rough previs frames. Before it looked like this, where a lot of the movie takes place in this conference room. It looked like this, not nearly as polished. You can see the figurine from the primitive figure directly from C4D. We're using it even for Ajax with his distorted or his cartoony proportions. This is another frame, actual gameplay here, and this is the animatic. So, unlike with Kaiju, where I was looking at a script and sort of reading someone else's comedic ideas and then trying to present how I would do it in VR and use the animatic tool, use the animatic as a tool to kind of sell myself in that context. With Ajax, I wrote it. So I was putting, words on the page simultaneously to exploring spatially. Honestly, before I'd written a line, I was already building the genie. Ajax is a genie. Building versions of him in space and looking at size differentials between the viewer and the characters to figure things out. As I started writing, overhead diagrams can be helpful to kind of organize your ideas, but it's not a precursor to the animatic. It's really a parallel path because it can be helpful for making layout decisions. It really doesn't do the trick that you need creatively to be thinking about these scenes and how the viewer is going to be placed or how they're going to be moved and what their scale is. It's really, it demands a spatial environment for that learning. So the entire writing process was simultaneous to the animatic and playing in C4D. It really was a writing tool in this fashion. So you can see the primitive skyscrapers, very similar to Kaiju. In fact, this project was a lot of the learning about scale and size and this kind of setting. I took, directly from working on Kaiju into this project, and then just kind of taking a step further with scale. You transform in size multiple times, many times, because our genie character does it as well. It's very small, it gets big. So you can see this project. This is, we've evolved a little bit in the use of the tools. There's still a viewfinder camera, which I'm calling the look around tool here, because we're just to name it what it is. And this is all inside of this camera null. There's a lot of tools in here for ourselves, and also what I'm showing you here is pretty evolved, because it was started as the early, rough animatic, but it evolved into an even more useful tool, because ultimately we would build the animation directly onto this. So we've got, floating head to indicate scale at a glance as we're working. We've got a little bit of a safe zone sphere around that head to give a sense of how close we want things, or how close we don't want objects to come to the camera. We have the VR camera itself here in order to render out frames. The a storyboard camera, which is actually a really helpful tool for looking and conceiving of everything as, here, I'm going to look at our clipping planes here. I have to turn it tiny. Clipping planes, of course, how well objects are rendered either very close to the camera or far away, and what you emphasize. Because in this movie, scale changes so dramatically, we actually start off in the lamp. We're very tiny. In fact, there are close-up scenes where we are very small relative to small Ajax, who's in the lamp and then comes out of the lamp and grows. So once we get up here, I've got to turn, so inside the lamp, clipping planes have to be tiny. Once I get up here, I got to turn them back to large, because there's the city outside. So scale changes dramatically throughout. And I can't remember what I was saying, but the storyboard cam is a 2D camera like the look around cam, but that has a target applied, so that we can watch through it and have some of these head movements that we assume for the user, or that we emulate if we were doing a clip, a 2D clip like I showed you for Walking Dead. But here it's more of a keeping track of information. Where are they looking right now? Oh, okay, that means we can have something out the window. It needs to be this window. So a storyboard cam kind of is a way to create an easy 2D storyboard, render it out of your master project, just like you would render your 360 frames. It becomes a working document. So you'll notice that there is a difference here that's pretty major between this animatic and the project file that I showed you for Kaiju Confidential. And that is, instead of having a bunch of different cameras indicating our sort of still storyboard images, being in that paradigm, there is keyframe animation here. These characters are going through poses, and they're being expressive, and the camera is moving, laid out in keyframes in time. However, I do want to point out that none of these are timed. The timing here is arbitrary. We've put 100 frames between different poses, and I'm still thinking about this as a storyboard creation tool at this stage, where I don't want to make anything that's difficult to adjust later. Like locking in performance in any way. If I need Ajax to go through a couple poses at a particular camera position, we'll just go in and generate several poses in a row without worrying about kind of the order of them. And then exporting that out and rendering this out is just to get all those poses into Premiere, because the animatic process, where we really want to start putting in temp voiceover, putting in music, deciding the pace and dramatics of the scene. I really want that to be in an editorial environment where moving things around or swapping two poses, oh, he should have his hands up earlier instead of later, that those changes are extremely fluid and in a very animatic workflow style. So you can hear there's temp voices here. Ajax is a comedy about a genie and a lawyer negotiating wishes for this little girl. And a lot of the humor is, contract humor. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I think it's hilarious. But it's really about the minutia of this negotiation that then both characters think have concluded in their favor, and then they sort of have a reckoning. But Ajax grows very large and holds the little girl, whose name is Izzy, in his hand. He's also starts out very small in the lamp before she opens the lid and he pops out. So this was really, a writing tool. I could put in temp voiceover, I could change a line, I could work on it sort of live with timing, and then take those changes and put them back into the script as a second step. The writing was happening here. The performance and pacing was happening here. And this sequence also became kind of the master audio sequence. As we got performance, we recorded our actors and we drop it in here, swapping out real music and sound design for the stuff that I was using as placeholder.
I'm not a lawyer anymore. I'm free. No longer bound in servitude to an endless string of fickle and demanding masters. Oh, right. Sorry.
So that's a little clip of, Chris Parnell doing his performance. Point being is that all that material went straight into the animatic, what started as the animatic file and became our kind of master assembly file. So you might think, well, but Ajax was supposedly a game engine project. Why are you doing this animatic with 360 video renders? Well, you're exactly right. Even though this project was totally different in some respects from something like Kaiju Confidential, which was pre-rendered, that still, having a 360 video animatic was still a very useful part of the process. And the file where we generated the animatic material, now I'm jumping ahead in time by months to show you ultimately our final production file. This is the same file. It's, the things are organized a little bit differently. There's a lot of splines for camera movements here, but our VR scale null with the head there to show scale and the safe zone and our VR production camera, we're not even using that camera. That's really the animatic production camera, because what ultimately is going to be exported from this file is an FBX to go into the game engine. And then in the game engine, there's going to be a player controller that's the simulated head sitting in this null. So all the movement and scaling that we were doing in the animatic translates directly into the final production file and then directly into the Unity game engine environment. All the choices we were making early on, even little details, the easing on the camera movement and the exact size, doesn't have to be replicated again. It's carried forward directly, and those same nulls are controlling those choices at the final production. The final compiled game, or rather, it's not a game, but the compiled app from Unity. So, what's changed between these files, outside of the structures remain the same, is the animation. So let me. Well, that's why. I was wondering why nobody was moving. It's because I'm looking at a very small period of time. So, our animator is working in C4D. These characters bringing in assets from potentially other artists, and our final production is taking place here. This project file is really about pure animation, expression, gesture, performance at this stage. And we've now, used the animatic project to edit together all the final audio into a great radio play and brought it back into C4D for the purposes of lip sync and performance. And this is what the project transforms into. So now it's one long, unbroken shot with movement happening all around the camera, because our viewer, of course, is going to be transported into this world. The lighting choices here are placeholder. There's no, even a lot of the textures are placeholder. You can see this big cone over here. That's the cone of light from the projector in the screen, or sorry, in the scene. But it's right now, all we need is really getting that shape into game engine. It's the translucency, the look of that cone is going to be done in game engine. So it doesn't have to look good here. It just has to be the right place and space relative to everything else. Ajax was created for a mobile device. You know, it's meant to play on Oculus Quest. And so a lot of the lighting, shadowing, texture work necessarily needs to take place there, because there's limitations. We can't have as many lights on at once as we may have done otherwise if it was for a different hardware. You know, that's what you do in the game engine along with the interactive authoring. All of that stuff is coming from C4D as an FBX. One interesting aspect to using a linear timeline like this for what will ultimately be interactive, it raises some interesting issues. So what do I mean by interactive in this case? In Ajax, the viewer is not aware of any choices that they can make, or they're not aware of their agency in the world at all. It happens all behind the scenes based on where they're looking. And what it is, it doesn't branch the story or have different endings. That's really not the point here. It's about creating a more seamless, immersive world and having things happen just as you look at them. Punchlines always land. You never miss anything behind your head. So we're really triggering certain animation when you look at it, and all that work is done in the game engine. But what we have to do to allow for that is make some clever choices. So for instance, Ajax always floats. Right now you see he's standing on the desk, but every time he's flying, there's particles emanating from him, little stars, a little sort of trail of stars that he leaves when he moves around, and he's always bobbing up and down in space a little bit. But you'll see he's not doing that bob here. Here he's frozen in space. That's because we've actually divided the animation across that line between the strict animation phase here and the assembly and the interactivity in the game engine by building a system, or allowing for, with our choices rather, doing some amount of procedural animation that's done live in real time, combined with our traditional animation here, his expressions and gestures. So an easy way that we did it, like our straightforward choice here, was that at this phase, he never moves from in space. He never has that bob up and down. It's not the intention creatively, but it's the right up time to do that bobbing is to add that in game engine as a procedural programmatic movement. That's where he hovers up and down. The same way with all the particles that come out of him and that we use at different times for magical events and magical objects. All that's procedural in game engine. And what that does is, I mentioned the interactive triggers here. The gaze triggers that we've hidden invisibly in the scene. If Ajax asks a question of Kleiner, the lawyer character, he finishes his statement, he'll sit there looking expectantly, floating up and down, particles emanating, the sound continues in the background, traffic sounds, everything is live, even though the master animation track is waiting for you to look over at Kleiner before that bit of comedy or that key dramatic moment happens. And it's not given away, because there's also procedural animation happening in the scene to give it life around you, even though key animation is waiting for you to trigger it. And I can show you a little bit of what that looks like. This is a screen capture inside the Quest here. So that little float and all the flashing stars are happening in the game engine and are not added in our animation file.
Pardon me, quick legal question for you.
What?
Why don't cannibals eat clowns?
Not sure that's the case.
Because they taste funny. You get it? Because they taste funny.
Ha ha.
Forget it.
Ah, good.
I'll leave you with that joke. So I hope you found that interesting and gave you some insight into me and my projects, but also VR in general, and especially where C4D can fit into different VR workflows, from ideation and creation to previs material for all types of projects, to full production and animation for pre-rendered projects and animated game engine experiences. And even creating some publicity material and other types of tasks you may come across. Ajax All Powerful is going to be more widely available and released more widely before the end of the year. It's actually already available in some VR arcades in Asia, but look out for that later this year, for especially for mobile VR headsets.